Kopf ihr, Zahl die anderen.
The two sides of a single coin could decide whether you lived or died. In Nazi-occupied Poland, human life was worth almost nothing. What you are seeing is a real scene from the streets of Warsaw at Christmas in 1943, when the Nazis brutally cracked down on civilians. By this point, the German army had already begun to show signs of strategic decline, but its claws were only digging in harder, according to records from the post-war Nuremberg trials. In Warsaw alone, hundreds and even thousands of civilians were killed every month in random street executions by German forces. And yet, under such brutal and suffocating rule, the Polish people did not surrender. Instead, they built the largest and most complete underground resistance network in Europe. By early 1944, the Home Army loyal to the government in exile in London had grown to nearly 400,000 fighters. And at this very moment, this underground Polish state was quietly waiting for a signal that would awaken an entire nation and call it to rise up. And the man carrying that message was already on the road. He carried a truth. And from this moment on, the race against time had begun. Inside the restaurant of a hotel in London, this man dressed like a gentleman was Lieutenant Nowak, the most legendary courier of the Home Army. He was responsible for an invisible front line, one end connected to the underground army in Warsaw, and the other to the government in exile in London. And right now, he was preparing for a mission from which he might never return. He would travel to Scotland for parachute training, then race back into Warsaw in secret. But just then, something unexpected happened.
Let me see that pretty face.
Officers! Hey, back off, man. Mind your own business. The problem is my father raised me to be a gentleman, so it is my business. But I am a dear friend.
Come on, Tom, let's go. It's not worth it.
Out of gratitude, the woman came over to Nowak to thank him. Her name was Doris, and she had come alone from Sweden. As they talked, the two strangers left a good impression on each other, and Doris was especially curious about the fact that Nowak was a friend of a high-ranking American officer.
Are you really friends with a commander?
To be honest, no.
Nowak's wit and courage quickly won Doris's admiration, but time was short, and their encounter had to end in a hurry. That night, while Nowak was packing his luggage, something completely unexpected happened. The man who knocked on his door and entered in the dark of night was none other than the Prime Minister of the government in exile. He assigned Nowak a mission that could cost him his life, and ordered him to carry it out immediately. Nowak instantly understood that he had accepted a historic mission. Late that night, the Prime Minister took Nowak into a car and drove toward the meeting place with British Prime Minister Churchill. But at that moment, they had no idea that a pair of hawk-like eyes was watching them from the shadows. A Nazi agent dressed in an American uniform was observing their every move. Fortunately, while the agent was sketching Nowak's portrait, he was caught red-handed by a patrol officer on duty, but the Nazi agent gave the officer no chance at all, and swiftly dealt with him. At the same time, Nowak finally got his wish and met the British Prime Minister in person. When the Prime Minister introduced Nowak to Prime Minister Churchill, Churchill immediately expressed his admiration for this famous courier. But after only a brief exchange, Prime Minister Churchill cut straight to the point. He made it clear that the British military, and even the Allies as a whole, opposed the Polish Home Army launching an uprising in Warsaw. Please tell Warsaw that we are, and always will be, friends of your country, but that area now belongs to the Soviet theater of war. Therefore, without Soviet approval, no military action can take place. Nowak said that the Soviets wanted to turn Poland into the 17th Soviet Republic, and that this was about his country's freedom, but Churchill still refused to send in the Royal Air Force. They had no choice but to listen and accept it. Even as the Prime Minister of the Polish government, he was branded with the word exile, and had no real say at all. And reality was just that cruel. As victory drew near, and the great powers began drawing the borders of the new world, Poland was hanging by a thread. Its gamble was whether it would keep its freedom, or become a Soviet satellite. In that moment, Nowak was lost, but the Prime Minister had already chosen to fight without looking back. He ordered Nowak to forget Churchill's words, bypass the commander-in-chief of the Polish forces in exile, and return to Warsaw immediately. He wanted Nowak to convince Home Army Commander Bohr to launch the uprising, but a few days later, Nowak ran into another accident. He had thought that once his parachute training ended, he would be able to return to Warsaw as soon as possible, but to his surprise, during training, he broke his arm, so the method for delivering the intelligence had to return to its original track. And to carry out the Prime Minister's unwavering decision, Nowak had no choice but to go directly to the headquarters of the Polish forces in exile for help. Unexpectedly, on the way there, he was rammed by a German agent's car. Fortunately, his injuries were not serious, but when he arrived at headquarters, a colonel dismissed him with contempt. "I heard there are transport planes flying from Brindisi to Tarnow." The other man said there were air transports. "Yes, but they were for senior officers and important airdrops. Not for you." With his return plan blocked, a gloomy Nowak walked into a cinema. He immersed himself in the noise of propaganda films about fighting back against the Nazis. But there, he unexpectedly ran into Doris. The two were delighted to see each other again. Nowak took the initiative to fulfill the promise he had made when they last parted, inviting her to attend a reception held by the Polish government in exile. Doris was overjoyed and accepted the invitation. Attending that reception had originally been a casual decision for Nowak, but to his surprise, it brought him an unexpected opportunity. He happened to meet the commander-in-chief of the Polish forces in exile. With the chance right in front of him, Nowak risked overstepping his place and honestly reported his predicament to the commander.
Znajdźmy spokojne miejsce. To jakiś absurd. Do tego dopuścić nie wolno.
After hearing Nowak's story, the commander was deeply shocked. He immediately said Nowak could take his private plane to Brindisi, then make his way back to Warsaw as quickly as possible. He wanted Nowak to truthfully tell the British government's position, and use it to stop the Home Army from carrying out the Prime Minister's reckless idea. Only then did Nowak finally feel as if a huge weight had been lifted. He silently watched the commander leave. Just then, Doris walked over, but what they faced once again was another regretful farewell.
I'm not sure if women are allowed in here.
Once again, we met too late. I have to leave right away.
Perhaps we'll meet again.
Perilous Street, 21B, apartment 5.
That night, Doris came as promised and knocked on Nowak's door. It seemed as if a love story was finally about to begin, but to their surprise, the commander's anxious aide arrived at the door and completely ruined the moment. From that point on, the two lost their final chance to hold each other. What the aide delivered was a piece of top-secret intelligence. He demanded that Nowak personally hand it to Home Army Commander Bohr, and warned him to protect it even at the cost of his life. That night, the Nazi agent who had been tracking Nowak watched in frustration as Nowak boarded the commander's plane and left London. Not long after, on the other side, German headquarters in Warsaw also received the agent's intelligence immediately. Because of this, SS Lieutenant Colonel Steiger, under Himmler's orders, rushed through wind and rain to Warsaw to personally take charge of the case. He immediately ordered the agent who had tracked Nowak in London to be transferred back to Warsaw. They planned to work from both inside and outside, capture Nowak, and seize the intelligence. Meanwhile, Nowak, traveling on the commander's private plane, had landed in Brindisi. As they parted, the commander still reminded him that he absolutely had to complete the mission, but when Nowak applied to the British Air Base commander for a flight to Poland, he was given the cold shoulder once again. The reason was that the Polish front belonged to the Soviet war, and he had no right to interfere. Only after Nowak sincerely explained that Poland was hanging by a thread did the base commander finally arrange for him to board a plane bound for Poland. After about 8 hours of flight, a Dakota transport carrying both supplies and personnel landed in the countryside roughly 200 kilometers from Warsaw. A large number of people and supplies were quickly moved away by the partisans who had come to meet them, but when the British pilot prepared to take off and return, he discovered that the plane was deeply stuck in the muddy ground. At the same time, the thunderous roar of the engines had already alerted the SS. Steiger's deputy, Major Witze, was leading SS troops straight toward them. The British pilot decided to abandon the plane and blow it up. But in the end, under Nowak's call to action, everyone worked together and pushed the aircraft out of the mud. Just as everyone was preparing to withdraw, a young partisan was unfortunately hit by German fire from the woods. Nowak rode along as they took the body back. When the farm woman saw her son's body being unloaded from the wagon, her legs instantly gave out. The accompanying partisan leader told Nowak that she had just lost her husband and eldest son. Now, her only younger son had died with the partisans too. In their grief, they moved the young fighter's body into the house, then prepared to set off for Warsaw. But unexpectedly, an awkward scene appeared. He said, "I don't know how to ride a bicycle." Nowak had no choice. Even if he had to learn at the last second, he had to learn to ride a bike as quickly as possible. Otherwise, The journey of more than 20 kilometers would cost them far too much precious time, but just as the practice began, the aggressive Witze stormed into the farmhouse with SS troops and trapped them inside. He asked the woman where her youngest son was. The man behind him said, "Answer his question, they are SS, not village guards." Facing Witze's interrogation, the farm woman said nothing from beginning to end. In the end, she blankly raised her hand in front of her face. Hidden in the attic, Nowak could only watch helplessly as Witze shot the farm woman, unable to do anything. Finally, enraged and humiliated, Witze ordered the entire farmhouse burned down. Amid thick smoke and raging flames, Nowak and the other two narrowly escaped through the rear window of the attic. After that, Nowak and Lieutenant Wolski of the Home Army, with help from the partisan leader, boarded a train bound for Warsaw. They had only just left the station when the pursuing military police arrived right behind them, and just as Nowak was secretly feeling lucky, a conductor who already knew their identities quietly warned him, "There is a sharp turn 6 or 7 kilometers ahead. You can jump off there." Nowak said, "I need to get to Warsaw." But the conductor said, "You won't make it to Warsaw. The military police will catch you first." As expected, the military police stopped the train at the next station and began searching the cars one by one. However, they did not find the wanted Nowak. In the end, the empty-handed military police left in frustration, and when the train dispatcher turned his face, a sly smile appeared. It turned out that moments before the military police boarded, Nowak had already swapped coats with the dispatcher. The dispatcher who had been helping the military police search the train was actually Nowak himself. After all kinds of twists and turns, Nowak and Wolski finally arrived in Warsaw. They wanted to meet their contact as soon as possible, but by then it was already curfew, because in Nazi-controlled Warsaw, social order had nearly collapsed. Thugs smashing, looting, and robbing appeared constantly in streets and alleys. The Polish police had long grown numb to it. Only the military police were still using violence to barely hold order together. With no other choice, the two men had to spend the night at the station, but the station was not as safe as they imagined. Before long, a squad of military police rushed into the waiting room. Although the two handled the search cautiously, a copy of the Times found in Nowak's suitcase immediately exposed their identities. In the shootout, the two were badly outnumbered and could only rush out of the waiting room in the chaos. They narrowly hid inside a corpse transport car and escaped the military police pursuit. They fled through the night, and finally knocked on the door of a street contact. However, when the contact, Marizia, prepared to take them to see Bor, Nowak discovered that he was not the person she had been told to receive. Because he had been personally approved for departure by the commander, his name had never appeared on the reception list, so no one knew that this extra man standing before them was the legendary Courier. At that moment, the person Marizia was supposed to receive was only Lieutenant Wolski. This awkward situation not only left Nowak speechless for a moment, but also pushed the already dangerous situation beyond his original control. Fortunately, Wolski finally broke the deadlock with one firm and righteous statement.
Dajcie spokój. Przylecieliśmy z porucznikiem razem, z Londynu, gdzie widziałem pana Nowaka w towarzystwie naczelnego wodza. Nie wiem, jakie ma zadanie, ale na pewno nie jest ono błahe.
Although Marizia eventually moved both men to safety, she only arranged temporary lodging for them. As for introducing Nowak to Bor, she still insisted on first receiving verification from London. Because of this, Nowak decided to take the risk of contacting one of his former contacts, but he eventually discovered that the contact had already been controlled by the Gestapo, and he himself was nearly captured by military police patrolling the streets.
Dzięki Bogu, że panią widzę.
Sprawdziłam raz jeszcze. Nie otrzymaliśmy z Londynu żadnej zapowiedzi, że pan ma przylecieć.
When Nowak saw Marizia again, he was out of options. He took out a wanted poster bearing his own portrait, hoping Marizia could use it to prove to Bor that he was the courier. At that moment, his sincere attitude began to move Marizia. Marizia told him, "I will find a way to help you, but I have to warn you, this will not be simple." Meanwhile, Nowak's whereabouts had also been placed before SS officer Steiger. The courier's escape infuriated him. At the same time, Steiger's attempt to secretly contact Bor and carry out political deception had already fallen apart. Now, whether they could successfully intercept the courier's intelligence had become the key to the SS destroying the Uprising forces, and the only Nazi agent who had seen Nowak became the key witness in the hunt for the courier. So now, Nowak had become the man both the Home Army and the SS were desperate to find. For Bor, the courier's top-secret intelligence would directly decide the lives and deaths of 40,000 Uprising soldiers. But what no one expected was that Home Army Colonel Monter would press the start button for the Warsaw Uprising behind Bor's back.
Ogłosiłem godzinę W.
To nie jest dobry moment. Panie pułkowniku Monter, proszę natychmiast odwołać rozkaz.
Tak jest.
At the same time, SS officers Steiger and Witze had already met the London agent who had returned specially for the mission, but to their surprise, this person was none other than Doris, the woman Nowak had met in London.
Wir hatten diesen Kurier, aber ist uns entwischt. Sie sind unsere letzte Hoffnung.
As time passed, Nowak, still unable to meet Bohr, grew increasingly anxious. That day, while drinking away his frustration in a bar, he finally received good news from Marysia.
Jutro godzina 12:15, dorożka 27, plac Unii.
But because Nowak had been tense for so long, he had a nightmare that night. Yet what he never expected was that the next day, a real nightmare would descend on him. On the way to meet Bohr, a ghost-like figure locked onto him. That person was SS agent Doris. Nowak followed Marysia straight to the meeting place with Bohr. Along the way, it felt as if his dream was repeating itself. Only this time, the ending was not a nightmare, but a relief. Nowak handed over the top-secret intelligence from the commander in London. Then he truthfully reported the position of Britain and the entire Allied side. Regarding the uprising after his meeting with Prime Minister Churchill, they had decided not to establish occupation zones based on the final front lines. Poland would fall under Soviet rule, and the Western Allies would not return. The cruel reality now lay before the Home Army. No one wanted to accept it, but they had no choice but to accept it. Post-war Poland was destined to fall within the Soviet sphere of influence. In 1944, the Polish people gambled their nation's fate for freedom, but what they ultimately received was abandonment, betrayal, and lies from the entire West. From this point on, Bohr and all senior leaders of the Home Army clearly understood that the uprising they were about to launch would be one with no outside help. The only side they could possibly ask for help was the Soviet Union, but the price would be the loss of freedom. And in the end, the Home Army made another tragic decision. They would carry out the will of the Prime Minister in exile and keep fighting. After that, everyone present, including Nowak, stated their position within that endless atmosphere of sorrow. Meanwhile, based on Doris's intelligence, the SS were closing in on this place, but they were still one step too late. Steiger and Witze came up empty. Seeing this, Doris came up with another plan. On the road where Nowak was leaving, she once again staged a chance encounter.
Help me, please.
The only reason for you to be in Warsaw right now.
But meeting Doris again at this time and in this place made Nowak begin to feel a trace of doubt. Until, from the conversation between Doris and Marysia, he learned the exact time of the Home Army uprising. Doris's eagerness to leave finally convinced Nowak of her true identity. So, while dancing gracefully, Nowak finally exposed Doris's disguise.
You know what I was thinking? There might be another reason for you to be in Warsaw. You are a Gestapo agent.
I come for you in the morning. You have to sleep somewhere, so...
Das sind meine Leute. Du entkommst hier nicht.
But what disappointed Doris was that the people entering the room were not the SS, but members of the Polish Home Army. The next afternoon, the completely unaware Steiger and Witze arrived as agreed. However, they did not find Doris waiting for them. What awaited them was the first shot of the Home Army uprising.
Der Aufstand.
Before Steiger could even react, he became the first sacrifice to mark the beginning of the Warsaw Uprising. And tragically, the last person he saw was the very woman he had once spared with a coin. She was Marysia, the Home Army contact. In the middle of the fierce battle, Nowak looked back and gave Marysia a knowing smile, then charged without hesitation toward the sunset. At 5 p.m. on August 1, 1944, the Warsaw Uprising officially began. Nowak had once been a courier defending freedom. In that moment, he finally became a soldier defending freedom.